Right, well, hopefully you can hear me. I'm told it's a bit muffled. It's dead on 7:30. I was hoping I was going to get a much gobbier person doing this, but you've got me. And because it's a church, if you wouldn't mind, I just want one quick pray. It's the only bit of God bothering we're going to do all night, but let's just have a moment. Father, I thank you that we live in a world where democracy is still found. As we think of the rights we have, as we hear the questions answered, as we think of our own opinions, help us to remember what a privilege it is to be able to go and vote, to be able to walk the streets with relative freedom and safety. Lord, may we have fun. May we remember where we are when the language might get worse. And can we really do something that matters for this town in the way that we vote? And Lord, we thank you for those who stand. A thankless task at times, we know. Amen. So I'm going to give the candidates a couple of minutes, 2.5 minutes, to say who they are, what they bring to it, why we should go for them, what's different about them to the rest, and anything else they want to say and to say. So I suppose we might as well start with this end. Or no, actually, we start on this end. You can't nick his minutes, can you? Chris, we'll go round in a circle because you're the polished one here. I know you're good at this. I've seen you do it 3 times now. No, is it 4? Yes, it is 4. Oh, gosh. I'm getting old. Over to you if you want to flick your switch and away you go.
Well, Vic, thank you so much for inviting us here. Thank you, everybody, for joining us at this Tamworth Hustings in St Editha's Church. My name's Chris Pincher, and I am the Conservative Party candidate in the election next week. In 7 days' time, in this country, in this constituency, in this church, we face a choice, a stark choice. Who will be the next tenant of 10 Downing Street? Will it be Boris Johnson, or will it be Jeremy Corbyn propped up by Nicola Sturgeon? Because those are the only 2 realistic choices. It's been my honour and my privilege for the last 9 years to be your Member of Parliament. And whoever wins next week, they will find it a great honour, I'm sure, and a great privilege also to be the MP for Tamworth. And in all the conversations I've had with people down the years since the referendum, and certainly in the last few weeks since we called the general election, one message has been given to me in Stonydelph, in Stonell, in Wilnecote, in Belgrave, wherever, in my mailbag, loud and clear. And that is, let's just get Brexit done and move on. Because that's what the country wants. That's what I want. Unfortunately, all the other main parties either want to frustrate Brexit or delay it or even cancel it. Only the Conservative Party will get Brexit done and move on to the domestic priorities that you all care about. And it's on that domestic agenda that I am campaigning for more police on our streets, better investment in our NHS, particularly focused on help for our Robert Peel Hospital and for mental health care. Investment, the man says rubbish about investment in healthcare. How can that be rubbish? Investment in education. More support for our high street and the small businesses that are the engines of our economic growth. More community action, more community trust. That's what I am campaigning on. I fundamentally and sincerely believe that Jeremy Corbyn will be a disaster for our country, that he will wreck our economy, that he will tear apart our country, and that he will leave us defenceless. A Conservative government will maintain our economy, invest sensibly in public services, and get Brexit done. So my message to you tonight is, in a week's time, vote to unleash our country's potential, vote Conservative.
So, if you would stand and tell us who you are, what you're bringing to the party, and what you would think.
Microphone on. Assume I can now be heard. I'm John Barry Wright. I'm standing as an independent candidate for the simple reason is if I'd like to represent Tamworth as an MP, there's no way I can get to be there unless I stand independent. Because To be an MP, for instance, in the Tory party, you've got to go through the long process, perhaps being a councillor, perhaps getting on in the local party, even be it Tory or any of the other parties, before you could even stand a chance, maybe, of being selected to stand as an MP. So, right, what do I think? Well, a few of you have probably read some of my election blurb. It has to be called communication, because that's essentially the correct word to use. It seems to me the most important parliamentary issue is Brexit. It's the most talked about issue for decades. It's divided friends. It's split the country like no other issue. There is a bit of a general dissatisfaction with the current House of Commons with respect to Brexit. MPs squabbling amongst themselves. It's a bit shameful, really. And personally, when it comes to Brexit, probably my first wish would have been to have stayed, but it's been voted against. So democratically, there's no other option to us than to come out. And I say, well, if we go out, then I'm fully behind that as well, because we have to support the democratic process. You know, and I can find advantages in being out. In fact, can you imagine what we're trying to do at the moment is go out with a deal where this country is trying to make a deal with the other countries. It's quite likely that if we do go out without a deal, they'll want to make a deal with us. We are a bit of a powerhouse in Europe, so switch things around a bit and think if we go out without a deal, which it doesn't matter to me, maybe they'll come and want to deal with us. Very likely chance of that happening. Other important issues, just briefly these, the health trust funding perhaps could be a bit more accountable. We're told there's millions being poured into the NHS, yet they're short of beds, and vital operations are being delayed. Where's it going? I've got 10 seconds left, so I'd like to thank Vic, and I'd like to thank the rest of you and my fellow candidates for being here tonight. Thank you.
And the next one, please.
Hi, I hope you can hear me. My name's Andy Tilley. I am the parliamentary candidate for the Green Party in this election. A little bit about myself. I'm not a Tamworthian, I'm from Burton, but I've worked in the borough since 2007. I worked at the Snowdome as a snowboard instructor after I was made redundant from my job as a national journalist. And lately I've had a wonderful job. I work at Two Rivers High School and I've worked at the primary school. And if you don't know, Two Rivers is a great place. It's a school for high school students with special educational needs, and that could range from somebody who has eyesight difficulties to some young people with life-limiting disabilities and illnesses. And that's a wonderful place. I represent the Green Party, and I've been a member and the treasurer of the Green Party in Tamworth for about 3 years. In my youth, I was very interested in environmental, ecological, climate issues, and I was also a supporter of the campaign for nuclear disarmament. I thought very long and hard about which political party I should join, and I chose the Green Party primarily not because of the focus on environmental issues, but because of their focus on social issues. That is my primary interest, obviously with a heavy bias towards our environment and the climate crisis which we're facing. I fundamentally disagree with the statement that this election is about Brexit. I believe this election is about people not being able to afford homes or food or their gas bill. People worried about education. People worried about relatives in hospitals. Brexit for sure is very important, but the people that I speak to, and in my heart, I care less about trade deals than I do about people sleeping in Middle Entry or people struggling for houses in Tamworth. These are the big issues that are facing our country at the moment, social issues. Mr. Pincher is right, it is a very important election, an historic election. We need to think about not only where we are, but where we want to go to, who we are, what example we're going to set for our young people. I don't want to talk too much about where I stand, because hopefully that will come out in the questions. But that's who I am and where I come from. Thank you.
And so we move on.
Anybody who knows me knows I have an interesting relationship with technology. My name, can you hear me? Is it on? My name is Chris Bain, and I'm the Labour and Cooperative Party candidate for Tamworth. My background, I'm not a career politician. I've actually had a real life out in the community. My father was in the army, and I joined the army after him. And in the army and in my family, I picked up the public service element that's been so important in my life ever since. And over the last 30 years, I've been working in the voluntary sector, in charities. I've worked for the NHS and in local government. And I continue to do that to this day. Where I fundamentally, and I think I join you in this, where I fundamentally disagree with Chris Pincher is when he says this election is all about Brexit. I think the Conservative Party would love this election to be all about Brexit, because that would deflect attention away from the things that are happening in our country. From the fact that we've lost 4,000 care home beds in 2 years, from the fact that we have the lowest number of acute beds in a hospital in Western Europe. And when I look at those things, and it makes me angry, I mean, a homeless person dies on our streets every 19 hours. The 6th richest country in the world, and we have people dying on our streets. How can that ever be right? Well, it can't be right. And the reason I'm standing here now is because I believe it isn't right, and I will do all I can to put a stop to it. And there are many other issues that go on. How can we say that Brexit is the most important issue when we look at climate change? David Attenborough spoke to Channel 4, and what he said was, it's too late to stop climate change. If he is right, then the change to our world will be substantial. And we look at civil unrest, we look at mass migration, we look at the way food is produced. It will never be the same again. How can Brexit be more important than that? Or even though I think the Conservatives would love to say it is. Education, housing, food, justice, I could go on. I've only got 10 seconds, unfortunately. And younger people being excluded from the political process. There is so much that needs to change. And if I become the Member of Parliament for Tamworth, I promise you this, I will work hard to change it.
And the next one, please.
Good evening. I'm Rob WHEWAY from the Lib-Dems. The highest first priority of this election is to go about saving the planet for our children and grandchildren. Yes, if we look at the David Attenborough documentaries, you see that the world is in a precarious position. And it's no good governments just saying, well, in 20 years, 30 years, we'll put things in place. We need action, and we need action now. And this isn't something I've come to recently. 38 years ago, I was campaigning with a liberal peer who was trying to put deposits on bottles and cans so they were returned like they always were. Labour and Conservative never supported that. And so we find our parks, our public place, littered with broken bottles, cans. 1 billion bottles are produced or sold each week in our supermarkets. So it's massive. We can do things ourselves, and we do need to do things ourselves, but we need government to reinforce it. We do need bottles to be returned to the shop. It would be good if batteries, you took them back to the shop and you got points on your loyalty card. We all need to walk a bit more and drive a bit less. We need to do that, not because it's just saving the planet. We need it for the health of our children as well. I'll leave you with that. Saving the planet, that has got to be the first priority.
Good evening. For everybody who doesn't know me, and I'm very disappointed if you live in Tamworth and you don't already know me, my name... I'm just going to have to... There you go. Can you hear me now? Okay. Okay, start again. For anybody who doesn't know me, I'm a bit disappointed because I've been a councillor in Tamworth for almost 4 years, and I've been a member of the UK Independence Party. I've been the treasurer of the local branch, and I've also been the chairman of the local branch. I joined UKIP because I wanted to fight and join the Brexit fight. First about me. I moved to Tamworth in 1973 with my wife and 4 daughters. They were all educated here. Before I retired, I was an electrical engineer working on machine tools. I worked extensively in Europe and all over the world, including China and the United States of America. My parents, my mother was Welsh. She was a state-registered sister, and my father was a tool engineer until he went to war, where he was blinded and was taken prisoner of war by the Italians. So that's a little about what and who I am. Why did I join this fight? Well, I've been in it since 1975, when I first voted to come out of what was then the European Economic Community. And I've wanted to be out of here ever since. As soon as UKIP came along, I followed them and supported them. I actually joined them in 2013 and formed the branch here to actually fight this. I agree with Christopher Pincher on this one. Don't be fooled. This is all about Brexit. Brexit will tell us whether we make the decisions of where our money goes or whether they make the decision over in Europe. I want our Parliament to be sovereign. I'm fighting for that. I want them to be the people who make the laws. I want them to be the people who share the money out and tell us where it goes. We get money back from Europe, but it's our money. But they tell us where they want us to spend it, and then make out that it's European money. It's not European money. It's our money. There's no such thing as European money. There's no such thing as government money. It's our money, and we have to decide where that's best spent. Thank you.
Now, before the candidates turned up here, they were given a bit of pre-knowledge of some of the questions you've asked. So they're going to take 2 minutes each, and actually, since you started this time, I'm going to move one along, and I'll let you go first for this. And the question is this: the austerity policies of the past few years have hit the working class hard. More hours and less real income, working 7 days a week with 0-hour contracts, while those who have been working find themselves in a place where the gap between the rich and the poor expands. If you win, what will you do for workers' rights?
Well, as an individual, thank you. As an individual, that would be difficult, but I hope to certainly join forces with the... Would you want to turn this on?
Okay, I would hope to join forces with other people with a view to improving workers' rights. 0 hours contracts, however, they're often condemned. But some people like them for allowing part-time working, and they also allow them to do more than one job. And the worker still has employment rights. So there's nothing taken away from them as far as employment rights. There's been a general improvement in workers' rights really over the decades. Minimum wage, for instance, paid holiday, and it's important to ensure that those existing rights aren't eroded, but improved upon. We are fortunate that the World Wide Web has a wealth of information on this subject, and by monitoring what is happening nationally, we can take steps to make things better. This could also be tackled on a local level by talking to employers who have unpopular working practices. Thank you.
So
We'll keep the ball rolling, if we may.
Hi. After I had advanced warning of this question, I looked up some statistics, and I would encourage you to look them up for yourselves, because when I read them, I found them quite unbelievable. Depending on which economic measure you take, we live in the UK, the 5th or the 6th largest economy in the world. 1 in 3 of our children live in poverty. Figures out today say in 2 years that could be 40%. 1 in 5 of our total UK population, the adult population, are in poverty. These are figures from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, The Big Issue. 1 in 200 people live on the streets. When I read those statistics, I found them obscene. The figure that I found staggering was that despite record employment in this country, in-work poverty is rising at a faster rate than employment. Work in this country, the 5th richest nation in the world, modern, Western, 21st century nation in the Western Hemisphere, for a lot of us, it simply doesn't pay. I know from personal experience, I was lucky enough to not have a 0 hours contract when I worked at a particular employer, who I won't name. I was lucky enough to be guaranteed 32 hours per week. I can tell you that my friend Dan Orton, who was on £7 an hour and earned £49 gross in the week before Christmas, 5 or 6 years ago, he did not enjoy the flexibility and the employment rights which realistically are non-existent for those workers. That lad trained for himself, got his first aid certificate, all his qualifications. He was on £7 an hour and he earned 49 quid gross in the week before Christmas. 0 hours contracts are iniquitous. We all know people who are on them, or we've worked in that system ourselves. Work doesn't pay for a lot of people in this country. Energy bills are soaring, housing prices are soaring, rents are soaring. We need to change that. We need to change that. Green Party policy is to bring in workers' rights. If you're on a 0 hours contract, 16 hours per week average, in 3 months you get a guaranteed minimum hours contract. Living wage, £12 per hour, extended to workers between the ages of 16 and 21. Please look at our other policies on workers' rights and our manifesto. Sorry, I've run out of time, but thank you.
And the next one, please.
Inequalities and the gap between rich and poor are the main cause of conflict within our country. There are people who say it is Brexit that has divided us. I think Brexit reflected something that was happening already. And the thing that was happening already was the gap between rich and poor was growing in this country. And when I look at what my party is planning to do about that, and I was so angry. I've met a nurse recently she works full-time, 40 hours a week, and she has to go to a food bank to feed her family. That will never, ever be right. So we have set out a series of measures to begin to deal with some of that. Maximum pay ratios of 20 for the bosses and 1 for the workers seems fair to me. The workers should certainly be getting more. I think we should repeal what I think is fairly draconian anti-trade union legislation, including the Trade Union Act of 2016. We have to ban union busting and strengthen legislation to protect people who work in trade unions. And one of the great iniquities in our country is the gender pay gap. That is an obscenity, and we are committed to closing that gap by 2030. And while I'm on the subject of the way women are paid, women's pensions, the WASPy women, it's a disgrace. There are too many people who are looking at the WASPy women and doing a financial calculation. It is not a financial calculation, it is a moral calculation. We have to put it right. We created it, let's put it right. And while I'm on that subject, the state should be responsible for enforcing equal pay legislation. If employers won't do it by themselves, we have to stop them. And I would give everybody full workers' rights from day one on the job and strengthen protections for whistleblowers. And while I'm on the subject, I would ban zero-hour contracts from the first day in office.
In 1914, there was a really interesting book written called The Ragged-Trousered Philanthropists. And in it, a very wise man said, everybody thinks that it's the rich that help the poor by being generous. It's not. It's the poor that help the rich. Anybody who's becomes rich has had lots of low-paid people working for them, or if they're in the entertainment industry or something like that, they've had lots of ordinary people spending their hard-won cash to buy the records or the discs or go to the concerts, whatever. So I would like to see a completely new attitude where we really do value all in society and accept that those doing the lower cost jobs, the ones that are paid less, are actually often the most important people in the chain, and what they get is not recognised. I do not think the answer is to go to nationalise industries. What we've found is people, if you can involve people in the business they're in so they become full citizens in their place of work, then they are able to negotiate a better terms and a fairer terms. And you just look, John Lewis Partnership, Waitrose, they achieved that. They above what other companies are achieving. So let's have that. On one other issue, I'm concerned that the value of ordinary working jobs have been devalued. If you look at churches or church schools, they will boast about how many children they get to university. How many will boast about how many their pupils who became carpenters or fishermen? We should be letting them start apprenticeships at 15. I'd be happy to reduce that. If they've got a decent apprenticeship, they can then compete on equal terms with people who then come from other countries to work here.
Okay, thanks. Okay, we've heard a lot about zero-hour contracts. Unfortunately, some people they work for and others they don't. UKIP believe that the employee, not the employer, should have the right to say, yes, I agree to them terms and actually carry on with these. Where they don't agree with it, then we should actually limit these. We're talking about low wages. Low wages have been depressed over the recent years with the mass immigration that's coming into this country. They've been depressed. UKIP will only allow 10,000 in if we were elected. That would make wages rise. That would make wages rise for the lower paid. We're also raising the personal tax allowance to £13,000. And also in 3 years' time up to £15,000. We'd scrap the bedroom tax, and we want a free trade deal across the whole of the world. That would then create more jobs in this country, which would give more. You're laughing. We want free trade. In some cases, where we're having to allow people in, we would actually limit them on time-limited visas and be able to track where they are and make sure that they've actually left the country. At the moment, we don't know how many are here. We know that there's 250,000 missing. We know that they've actually seen 50,000 and they've disappeared within 2 weeks. What I'm saying is we really don't know who's here. We need to know how many we've got here so we can put them into proper employment and not use them the way that we are now at the moment for cheap labour. Thank you.
Well, that came in dead on time. Next question is one that's been asked by many people. Have I not done? Oh.
Well, I wouldn't mind having a go, Vic, if that's all right.
I'm sorry, Chris. I knew I'd left you to last at some stage. Sorry.
Someone's got to at some point. Look, first of all, if I can just address myself to Chris in his remarks earlier on and also in his remarks just now. He said this election shouldn't be about Brexit, but then spent quite a lot of time talking about Brexit. And that's the point. Unless we can get this thing done, we cannot move on and deal with the real questions that face our economy, like the question which has been put by this questioner. Now, I want to see jobs created in this country, good jobs. I disagree with the point that people are working longer. The TUC says that in the last 10 years, people work 18 minutes less than they were working in the previous decade. The Gini coefficient, which is the international measure of rich and poor, says that wealth is increasing and the difference between rich and poor in this country is decreasing. Since 2010, we have created 1,000 jobs every day. And those jobs are largely outside London and the southeast. They're very largely full-time. 0 hours contracts account for a very small proportion of jobs in our country, and the Taylor Review, which looked into them, said that if you abolish them, you'll be taking jobs away from people. You'll be pushing people towards food banks and onto the dole. Is that really what you want to do? I will vote for proposals that raise salaries for people in this country, like raising the national minimum and living wage to £10.50, which will give workers in our country £4,000 extra. I'll vote to increase the employment allowance, which means an extra £1,000 for small businesses. I'll vote for more research and development and tax credits to allow businesses to research and develop. Create jobs, create prosperity, give the people the right to work. That is the most fundamental right of all.
Right, well, we're not taking questions from the floor at the moment, but having missed Chris, my apologies. Next question, been very popular. It's a composite of quite a few people's questions. We know that universal credit, particularly the 5-week wait for the first payment, is pushing people to food banks. Tamworth Food Bank's given out 861 3-day emergency food parcels in the last 6 months. Not only that, the income of some of the most vulnerable people in society has been dwindling due to the benefits freeze. If you become MP, what will you do to fix this? And we'll move to you first, if you may.
Thank you, Vic. Without wanting to hark back to the previous question, I think there is a link between the first question and this one with regard to the rise in in-work poverty. Not everybody's on 0 hours contracts, but I think it is indicative of the way that employment is weighted towards the employer, and people are desperate for any sort of work and they're being exploited. In-work poverty is rising. The Green Party policy is to abolish universal credit, simple as. Instead, we would bring in something called a universal basic income, an unconditional financial payment that everyone would receive at a level above their subsistence needs. It is not to help people exist, it is to help them live above a subsistence level. No one on benefits would currently be worse off. The rate will be paid at £89 per week for adults and £178 for pensioners. That is £10 more than most pensioners or the most lucrative state pension at the moment. There would be additional supplements on top of that for disabled people, lone parents, lone pensioners, families with incomes under £50,000. People who claim housing benefits now would continue to receive housing benefit with the universal basic income on top. People who've done these sums have worked out that people earning the minimum wage and working 37.5 hours a week on average would see their income rise, if they're on a minimum wage, by between 10 and 15%. For a lot of people, that is a very significant amount. People say, well, that's great, but where does the money come from? We estimate it will cost 86.2 billion, and that will be met from tax changes and savings in revenue. Perhaps we could not spend money on HS2, for instance. The Green Party will mainly raise that money from a carbon tax. We will tax polluters. Also, the tax system would be changed so that people who derive their income from wealth will pay tax at the same rate as people who derive their income by working.
I was really pleased to see this question amongst the ones being asked. In-work poverty is an obscenity. If people are working hard, they should not have to think about how they feed their families when they leave work. 9 million people in this country live in households in poverty where at least one member of that household is in work. 9 million people. That is not acceptable in a modern society. So there's a number of things I would do immediately. Firstly, scrap the obscenity that is universal credit. Implement an emergency package of reforms to mitigate some of the worst features of that iniquitous benefit. End the 5-week wait by introducing an interim payment. I would also immediately suspend what is a vicious sanctions regime for people on JSA and other benefits. Lift 300,000 children out of poverty by scrapping the benefit cap and scrapping the 2-child limit. They should never have been put in place in the first place. Scrap the bedroom tax. What a nasty piece of legislation that was, and it needs to be removed from the statute books immediately. Increase local housing allowance. Local housing allowance, the lowering of local housing allowance has contributed to homelessness, and it has to be lifted. Stop work capability and PIP assessments. They're an obscenity and they need to be stopped. They have no place in a modern society. Introduce a real living wage for everyone from the age of 16 onwards. Surely anybody who is capable of work should be rewarded properly regardless of their age. And the final bit, I'm actually going to finish on time this time. I agree with you that we should be piloting basic universal income. It's been tried in other countries and it's been successful, and I think we should be trying it here. People shouldn't be living in poverty while they're in work, and we should be helping them not to do so.
One of the problems of politics and government is that politicians want to do something before the next election comes up. And it's very interesting that the universal credit has run into all sorts of problems, the same as the Child Support Agency did. It was rushed in, it was tried to do it too fast, and so there was lots of mistakes made, and is still being made. Basically, we need to reduce it from 5-week delay to 5-day delay. If you're really on the breadline, 5 weeks means you go into debt and then you have to start paying for other things as well. So if we can reduce that for 5 days, from 5 weeks to 5 days, that will be an enormous help and is affordable. We also believe that we should be looking at a basic income, whether you're in or out of work, available to all. But we wouldn't want to just rush it in, say, trial it first, see how it works, and if it works, then spread it out and learn the lessons of the Child Support Agency and the universal credit. Certainly the 2-child cap, that should go. I don't think if someone said, well, taper a little bit on the 3rd or 4th to save a bit of money might be a reasonable compromise if there isn't the money there. But basically, I think it should be done away with. Yes, and we want a review immediately independent review to see what's a living wage, what's a realistic living wage, and then if that independent review comes through, we would say that all government employees should be paid on it. And of course, if we can high the bar with government employees, then the rest of the workers should follow through, because it'll set the bar a bit higher.
Okay, thanks. The 5-week universal credit payment gap. UKIP doesn't see anything wrong with the universal credit where it ties all of the benefits together. Where the problem is these people are vulnerable people, poor people, sick people, disabled people, and they're having to go for 5 weeks without any payment. Some of them have got no other means of finding any money. Some people have actually committed suicide through it. So what we're saying is that even if you want to bring a new benefit system in, there should be no loss to these people who are vulnerable. They should be paid the same amount until they've actually swapped over onto that universal credits. There should be some guidance in that, and they should actually follow. In the hustings in 2015, I was sat where you are, and I listened to Christopher Pincher when we was talking about food banks. He actually said more people were using food banks because they knew where they were. I totally disagree with that answer. They use them because they're being forced to, because they're on low wages. And they're also forced to use them when they're out without money going through this 5 weeks. Over 5 years, 550,000 people have actually appealed to the benefit on this scheme from ATOS, or ATOS, for the capability assessments. That system has to be changed. What we propose, UKIP, is that they should change it and put a system in place with qualified medical practitioners, not nurses. Again, a government also needs to do more for the homeless, the veterans and child poverty. We live in the 5th richest country in the world, and yet we can't supply and can't look after our veterans. They're dying on the streets. But we can spend £14 billion overseas, and we can also find money for the immigrants and the refugees. Charity starts at home. In my opinion, they should come first. A small amount of wasted resources being diverted towards helping these people would make all the difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Vic. Well, I disagree with Chris on universal credit. And in fact, many people in the Labour Party do too, including its Deputy Leader, Tom Watson, who agrees with universal credit. The Trussell Trust, which runs food banks, says that universal credit can raise 300,000 people in work out of poverty. And if you go to JCPs and talk to the people who are out of work, they will say that universal credit is great. It works for them because it enables them to tailor the help that they give to people that really need it. If they're not sufficiently educated and need a better CV, they can focus on that first before work. If they haven't got a home, they can focus on that before work. Universal credit brings together all sorts of disparate benefits into one. It makes it more transparent, easier to administer, and easier for the person who is the recipient to understand it. And when it is properly rolled out, and I disagree again with Rob, who said it was done too quickly. In fact, it's been rolled out very slowly and issues with it ironed out. It will be £2 billion more generous than the present schemes. And given that our salaries, all of our salaries, wages are now going up above inflation, the wages freeze, the benefits freeze will end as well because those benefits will be going up. I'll continue to vote for a system which helps people get on to the job ladder, that doesn't provide a cliff edge for them, which means that they can't get out of the cycle of dependency, because work is the best way to a better life, a better home, a happy family, not the trip back to the past that Chris seems to adumbrate.
No, you'll get a chance. You'll get a chance to do that at the end. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you, Vic.
I'll turn it on again, shall
The theme of food banks, I wish so, and we seem to keep coming across, we're obviously talking about many things, and the universal credit system occurs whichever one of the candidates is speaking. The fact that food banks exist indicate that many people are struggling under the current benefit system, and highlights the fact that it is unfair and not working in many cases. The waiting time for universal credit is gross and definitely needs improvement. Studies also suggest that the use of food banks has increased where universal credit is in use. So there's a direction to go in. There is probably many other constituencies facing the same problems, and accordingly may have MPs wishing to fight this issue. I would seek out those MPs and join forces. Benefits cannot be applied in a one-size-suits-all manner. People's situations vary, so benefits should vary accordingly. And we can start, it's been said already, by getting rid of the bedroom tax. Thank you.
Well, the next round begins. Here's the question for you. Cuts to our local council and our public services have hit this town hard since 2010. Our schools haven't received the same funding as other parts of the country. What's your opinion on this, and how would you ensure our town receives the financial support it deserves? And over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. When I looked at this question and I thought about the funding for public services, the cuts are affecting not just the schools, although 4 out of 5 schools will be worse off than they were in 2015. It also impacts on areas as diverse as social care. We now have 1.4 million older people not receiving the social care they need. They've been assessed as needing. It's impacting on healthcare. We've got 100,000 vacancies in the NHS and 130,000 vacancies in social care. It's impacting on housing. It's impacting on transport. It's impacting on the environmental services, fire and rescue, policing. I was disappointed to hear the pledge from the Conservative Party for 20,000 more police officers. When we actually looked at that, of course, it wasn't quite what it appeared to be. 7,000 of them would not be officers on the beat, and it would still be less than the number of police officers there were in 2010. So I think what is clear from all of this is that austerity has failed. And what we need is to respond on behalf of our schools. We cannot have a situation where the parents at schools are having a whip round to pay for equipment and books, which parents tell me is happening now. We cannot have that. So what we must do is to do a number of things. We have to reverse the cuts to Sure Start so that our children have a better start in life. We have to bring services that were previously provided by local government and others, we have to bring them back in-house. Services are for people who live locally. They are not for shareholders living in London. So let's bring those services back in-house. Let's close the tax loopholes for elite schools. Let's invest in high-quality childcare for all 2 to 4-year-olds. We've got a lot to do in terms of our public services to restore them to where they were, to give the services back to people that we relied on in the past. There's a lot to do, so let's get started now. And if I am the Member of Parliament for Tamworth, I will make sure that it's very high on the agenda and we start from day one.
Hi. It makes sense to be spending money at the moment when interest rates are so low. It makes sense to put a lot of work into insulating homes, making sure there's low fuel systems and that. it makes sense to spend money on our hospitals and our education in our schools. What we mustn't do is have it rushed in, time limited, and to capital expenditure mostly. What we've seen time and time again over the years is a government suddenly says, oh yes, we've got to spend all this money, we've got a target. And it comes down to the local authorities, and usually by about February, and they've got to spend it by April, by the end of the financial year. And this constantly leads to waste. We need to have systems where they say, well, what's going to be the cost over a few years, and make sure that the revenue costs are put into the equation. It's okay opening a nice new community centre and having everyone shake hands and picture in the paper, but if 2 or 3 years later you can't afford the youth workers or the community workers or the people in them, then it's a waste, and too often that has been done. As a general thing, we should also be devolving much more to the lower levels. Local government has suffered by every government for about 100 years. Remember, local government used to run the gas and the water, used to run motor tax. Yeah. We need more at local level where people know what's going on. And particularly we need that with social care, where at the moment things get held up just because of discussions and debates, or arguments really, between the National Health Service and local government as who should care for who. Yes, the devolving power, I know it didn't affect Tamworth, but devolving power to the metropolitan counties showed that great steps could be made forward in transport infrastructure. We're benefiting from that devolution, which was stopped purely because Margaret Thatcher didn't like it.
Okay, thanks. Tamworth schools have been underfunded for a very long time. The government actually uses what they call a funding formula. That means there are winners and losers. Unfortunately, Tamworth has been on the losing side for many years. I've written to Chris on many occasions about this, complaining about the unfair system that is being used. Why are our children suffering? Yeah, why are they actually suffering? We pay the same tax as everybody else. If they're actually serious about improving the outcomes for children, then we need to start at the very beginning. There's plenty of evidence of this. If you read up on it, you can see it. We have to put more money into preschool and primary schools. That's where all the building blocks start for these young children to learn. This will stop students coming out at the other end, where they are illiterate and innumerate. And that is happening in Tamworth today. Since 2015, education budgets have been cut by 9%. In real terms, that's 17%. That's been done by this government. Now they're offering to put £7 billion back in over 3 years. Will they actually do that, or is this just electioneering until they get back in? It's strange how they can cut funds when they go in and then offer funds when there's an election due. UKIP will increase the school's budget by £4 billion per year, not over 3 years. Over 3 years, that'll be £20 billion, and it will supply 30,000 teachers. That will definitely improve the outcomes for the children in Tamworth. UKIP want to reinstall grammar schools. That's a proven track for working class children. Okay, I'll leave it at that, thank you.
Well, Robert needs to read the Conservative manifesto more closely, because we're not going to invest £7 billion in education, we're going to invest £14 billion in education. Do your maths, Robert. And that means £4,000 more for primary school pupils, it means £5,000 more for secondary school pupils, and it will help kids in Tamworth, because it is true that over the years, governments of all stripes have not funded Staffordshire as well as they should have done in respect of education. And we've seen the results. But it's not all about spending money on shiny new schools. We've all seen new schools being built in Tamworth, and we know that they haven't necessarily reflected the educational standards that we would wish to reach as a result of those new schools being built. What really matters is inspiring leadership in schools, paying teachers really well, and that's why we're going to start the starting salary for teachers at £30,000 to give those people who are leaving university and are bright a good reason for becoming teachers and for making sure that their jobs are well respected. We need to make sure our kids get the right education for them so they've got the skills of the future. That's what the Conservative Party wants to see. That's what the Conservative Party will deliver. Better schools in our area, better teachers, expanding the Teach First programme to make sure we're bringing the brightest and the best from other professions into teaching. That will make sure that we get the right standard of education in our town and the right opportunities for young people.
What about this one?
Next question.
Well, cuts are constant. I'll turn it on here, shall I?
Yeah, you'll do.
Cuts are constant. You're right, and we get fed up of hearing cuts nationwide, and they all seem unavoidable. But as far as schools are concerned, it seems that the gradual introduction of academies is seeing funding directly from central government, and may be the better way to fund our schools. If Tamworth schools are underfunded compared to other towns, the question that has to be asked is why, and now we can redress the balance or imbalance. Now, as Brian mentioned, the national funding formula, this is a system that is not yet been introduced, and according to my records it's not introduced till later next year. It needs to be implemented as soon as possible, because this may be the solution to redress the balance between schools. So this is designed to ensure a more consistent share in the funding budgets. So if I was MP, I'd certainly push to have that national funding formula brought forward quicker than ever. Thank you.
Hi, I'm lucky enough, I've worked in some great places, and I'm lucky enough to work at a fantastic school in Tamworth. I can tell you that the two schools that I've worked at in Tamworth, Landau and Two Rivers, are both fantastic schools. They're amazing schools. So despite the cuts, the people who work for your kids do an amazing job, and they're incredibly committed. The school that I work at, Two Rivers High School, and its primary site have been outstanding schools for as long as anyone can remember. And the reason for that is because they're blooming outstanding schools. They were local authority outstanding schools until September. So I asked myself the question, why does one need to change a winning team? And it comes down to a matter of principle, really. The Conservative Party principle is that education is a commodity and there is money to be made out of it. I think I speak for a lot of my colleagues when I say they probably share my standing on this principle, that education is not a commodity. And when it comes to talking about matters of principle in the fifth richest nation in the world, kids come before rich man's railway lines to London. If we're talking about spending money and investment, let's invest it in our kids, in our future. Our education system, in my opinion and the Green Party opinion, is that education should be free. And at the moment, it is very expensive, especially if you're in a university education. The Green Party would abolish the academy system and return all schools to a local authority control. Why? Why? Because they're for local people. Who cares more, local people and the local authority, or a corporate from Ofsted and the Department of Education? While I'm at it, Ofsted would go as well under the Green Party manifesto. And methods of assessment would be based locally. Who cares? You and your kids and your local authority or people in the Department of Education in London?
I think we've done everyone. Have you to speak? Have I missed you like I've missed Chris? You started this one, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
You did, didn't you? I thought you had. It all gets a bit difficult down here sometimes. So, in this general election, sadly, many people will vote on one issue, and that is Brexit. Forgetting Brexit for a minute, what do you personally think the biggest area of concern facing our country at the moment is? Why do you think your party is the best one to deal with that issue? Or if you're an independent, why do you think you're the best set to deal with it? Because that's fair for you too. Right, who's first?
Hello? That's okay, thank you. I've said quite right at the start, preventing the climate change and trying to save the planet is absolute first priority. But after that, I want to look at children's health. Any of you over about 60, 65 will have walked to school, primary school, on your own and walked back. It means you got healthy exercise every day, and because the side roads you walked along to go to school you lived on, you could play outside. In fact, if we made the residential roads safer for children, just the side roads, then we could give each child nearly half an acre of playing space at no cost to the government. And what's happened, because we've allowed cars to dominate side roads, what's happened? Well, of course our children are suffering. They're suffering from obesity, they're suffering from mental stress, they're suffering from respiratory diseases. People are dying earlier, children's educational development is slowed down because of the pollution. So we really do have to look at side roads and make them safe for playing in. We can afford to do it because A, it would cost very little, but secondly, the National Health Service is wasting your money by treating what is an environmental problem with pills, potions. Any charlatan can come along and say, oh yes, this will help you with obesity, and they fall for it and they pay for it. Or individual therapies, of course it does individual, but you can't put it across the whole of the society. It's an environmental problem, and the NICE, National Health Service, Public Health England are all denying it and making sure the money goes to stakeholders who provide pills and various ways of dealing with it. It's a disgrace. If it was done deliberately, it would be corrupt. As it is, it's done just because they're not clever enough to sort it out.
Okay, let's forget it. What concerns have you got? What's the main concern you got? Well, there's several concerns I got. Child poverty, child grooming, child exploitation, human trafficking, acid attacks, knife crime, the homeless, veterans dying on our streets, lack of real police officers, overdevelopment on floodplains, A&E hospital closures, plastic waste and the environment.
Don't plastic bottle!
Single-use plastic in front of.
Yeah, it actually says on there recyclable. All right. Oh, listen, where was I? A&E hospital closures, plastic waste and the environment, our children being indoctrinated at school, free speech being denied, and a whole raft of other things that concern me. But my biggest concern, having to think about it, is the universal lack of trust in our politicians. We elect them every year on a platform that they want to stand on, and when they get elected, they don't deliver. So if you want to deliver on all of the issues that I've already spoken about, read the UKIP manifesto. We will deliver on all of those subjects. They're all in there. What we should do, or what we have done in the past, is hold politicians in high esteem. Today, that high esteem of respect has been lost. UKIP want to replace that. Please, as I say, vote UKIP. We want it, and we will actually repair that damage. Thank you.
Well, it's actually a very interesting question. I think Hugh Loxton is the questioner in this particular case. I hope, Hugh, if you don't mind me naming you, but not shaming you, because I think it is an interesting question. Of course, I would say that we've got to get Brexit done because it includes everything else, including child poverty or saving the planet. But to address your question directly, I think that we have to have a conversation about the power of the internet, because it is very powerful. It's great that we're able to use it. It has changed our lives. But there are questions to be asked about the disrespect that it can generate in terms of our communications, bullying, people who feel isolated. Perhaps you feel isolated, madam, I don't know. The fact it is having a very serious effect on our high street, so that Amazon is able to sell things more easily to people, and it means that our high street is being affected, and also the out-of-town shopping centres, which once used to affect the high street even more so. Disinformation, fake news, cyber attacks. These things are important and are powerful, and it's worth thinking about how we deal with them and challenge them. So I would say that the internet and communication is an issue which we need to think much more seriously about once we're through the question of Brexit, and once we've handled, of course, the great question of the defence of our realm. The government's primary responsibility is to protect us all. And I think if you ask yourselves that question, who is better able to protect you, your families and our country? Is it the Conservatives or is it Jeremy Corbyn? You'll find the right answer.
Thank you. I like Brian's comment, firstly, about the integrity of people who run the country, but I'm not going to talk about that now because he's just scuppered my paragraph here. However, I do have another one, and that is, I think one of the biggest issues is drug-fueled crime. Now, drug-fueled crime, as you can probably imagine, encourages people to break into your house just to try and steal something, to raise enough money to buy the next fix. And of course, drug-fueled crime isn't just at that lower level, it's at much higher level. It moves into your gangs, it moves into your knife crimes. So this isn't going to be an easy one to tackle, and I think to tackle this issue, you can't do it at teenage level. I think the power of drugs and the danger of drugs may have to be brought down into the junior schools to try and give some idea to them in the hope that they'll grow up and respect the power of drugs and what they are dangerous about. The other interesting thing, there is a fact, there are more drug driving offences now than there are drink driving offences. So that's an interesting one. That's an area we've got to stop. So we start maybe with the youngsters and try and make sure that they'll understand the danger of drugs.
I did mention at the start of the evening that I used to work in national journalism, and I've heard some things. I just want to check. The MP for Tamworth did say, and I think I quote, Brexit occludes everything, including saving the planet.
In terms of debate.
Brexit occludes everything, including saving the planet. We're talking about matters of principle, aren't we? Clearly, in my opinion, the overwhelming issue facing not just Tamworth, England, the United Kingdom, the world as a whole, is the climate crisis. I was in the council chamber the other week when Tamworth Borough Council recognised that and set a target, my opinion, not ambitious enough, but it was, they have set an intention to make sure the borough's activities are net carbon neutral. And that's a start. It's as simple as this: we have to stop burning fossil fuels. It's that simple. It is a very difficult truth to face, and it is a very difficult problem to overcome. But that is what is powering, driving this climate change. I'm glad that Rob mentioned pollution. It's something that is very sinister and it's invisible, but it affects our community immediately. 3,000 deaths per year in the West Midlands, according to Public Health England. That's regardless of Brexit. We need to start thinking about how we live our lives and how we run our economy, who the economy is for and what it's for. We live in the United Kingdom. It is pretty, it's not so great for sun, is it? But it's pretty good for wind, and it's pretty good for tidal power. The Green Party would invest £1 billion every year for 10 years. We need to be carbon neutral and self-sufficient in energy by 2030.
This is a good question. I was actually going to talk about the climate emergency as being the most significant thing that we are facing. And actually, Chris, I think it is slightly more important to save the planet than to get Brexit done. But there are many contenders for the things that we need to deal with. We could talk about homelessness, we could talk about housing. But I changed my mind, and what I thought I would talk about is health and social care, because I think both of those things are in crisis. The Care Quality Commission, in their report in 2018, said that health and social care in the UK is at a tipping point. They have never come out with language like that previously. It is at a tipping point where it could simply fall over. And it could simply fall over because of 10 years of austerity. The NHS and social care is being hit by two giant forces. One is austerity and the other is demographics. People are older and they are living longer with limiting long-term conditions. And our health and social care services are struggling to keep up with that. And you can see it reflected everywhere. We now have waiting times at A&E at record levels. It's never been like this before. We have 100,000 vacancies in the NHS, including 40,000 nurses. We've never been like this before. 120,000 social care vacancies. One of the impacts on a care home near where I am was when they opened a B&Q, because the care assistants in that care home could earn more stacking shelves at B&Q than they could caring for vulnerable people. When is that ever going to be right? So what I'm going to talk about then very briefly in just 10 seconds is it needs to be properly funded, we need to pay proper wages, we need to address the recruitment and retention crisis, we need to end the privatisation of health and social care services, and we have to say to Donald Trump, keep your hands off our NHS.
Well, I don't know if they're tired, but I am. So we're going to take 15 minutes break. I think it would be kind. Would you like them to talk to you, or would you like to just regroup your thoughts and spend a little bit of time in Perda, or are you happy for people to... Yeah? Loo break. A loo break. Let them have a drink. Give them 15 minutes. We'll be back, and then we're going to take another lot of questions. It's going to be a minute a person. If you want something to ask, tell me, but there's too many ahead, I think.
There is no climate emergency. There's an environment emergency.